Greetings, everyone. I am so excited to be back in conversation with Rob Comer today, and he's going to be presenting some mind-blowing information that he's just recently gotten clear about that relates to our DNA, the energies and consciousness in our DNA, and how this then also ties in with the profound work that you've done, Rob, with your book that's now out, The Lost Octave. And I really encourage everyone to get it. It is so packed with wisdom and information. It's extraordinary, Rob. But let me just briefly introduce you, and then we'll get into our conversation. Rob Comer is a distinguished cosmic architect of the mystical. And the more I talk with him, the more I know that. And he's an astrologer, artist, and author. He also collaborates with Robert Edward Grant and has explored and deciphered the petroglyphs in the King's Chamber. I mean, and I just want to say, Rob, it is amazing the patterns that you're attuning to that underlie music, astrology, now our understanding of genetics and DNA, the stars. You're really deciphering the music of the spheres, and it's beautiful. So thank you for being here and being in this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, Heather. Yeah, it's just been so great, from the release of the book. Obviously, it's been just over a month, and it's been so great, that it's become an international bestseller in 9 countries. And I always joke, that it's that a book of love, made it to #1, expressing about the divine feminine view on astrology and reality. And so for that to be sort of, throughout all these countries, places that, in Japan and Australia and the Netherlands and America, and it's just so great that there's a resonance, that people feel a call to the book. And yeah, it's just blossoming, everything from here.
Beautiful. It's great. And I think you're helping us see how astrology can take us into this next level of consciousness and reintegration of the sacred feminine. But
Yeah.
talk to us about these downloads you've been getting and this deciphering you've been doing about the DNA code.
Yeah, beautiful. So, as many people may know or may not know, so the Lost Octave is sort of based on the structure of the I Ching. And the Lost Octave was the understanding that I basically found an octave, so a missing 8 that was inside the I Ching. And obviously that was really interesting, that journey, because it's a 3,000 plus year old ancient manuscript that's been studied. And so to find this was that first key. And that's what eluded me to the fact that there's this idea of the multidimensional understanding of astrology. And so, this can often feel very far out, as soon as we speak about hyperdimensions or hypercubes, all this sort of stuff. But really, it's not so much about going outwards, it's actually the going inwards. And so a hypercube, just to give an idea, is simply a cube inside a cube. And so you can kind of see that with the King's Chamber. So you have a room, which is like a cube or a rectangle, and then you have the sarcophagus inside. So this is where it kind of feels very big, all of this, when you talk in these terms, but actually it's very simple. And I explained to somebody else the other day that when you're laying in your bath, in your bathroom, you're basically recreating a hypercube. And it's so funny that most people have very profound epiphanies, in the bath and things like this. And so this is how we can understand how, on a human level, these things work. So I was working on this, obviously on the book, and then I came across basically a scientific study that was done a month after I had this epiphany of doing the Lost Octave. So that was on the Lionsgate last year. And then I found that this scientific paper had just been published in the September, so a month afterwards. So I found this paper, and of course it's really scientific. When you look at it, it's just like, where do you start? And it explains about the amino acids within the DNA. And so the amino acids have been coded to the I Ching previously. And so as I was looking at all of this, then I applied the hyperdimensional understanding to it. And then basically I could see the pattern with the amino acids now working on this fourth dimensional level. And then as I've later discovered, I've managed to upscale that into the fifth dimension and into the sixth dimension. And again, it's like, well, what does this mean? So the fourth dimension is kind of commonly associated with the sense of time. And so, the third dimension is matter. So in order for an object to move from here to there, it has to move through time, or it takes a distance. It takes me time to walk to the shop. And so really we're operating on the fourth dimension all the time, because we're saying, well, how long is it going to take me to get from here to there? So we are doing it, or we just haven't realized that we've been working this fourth dimension, or, And so then the fifth dimension, you could say, is like akin to space. So that's kind of like the distance. And obviously space and time are kind of like two sides of the same coin. So if it's going to take me that much time, there's a certain distance it would take me. And so these things are so interwoven. And then as far as I can tell, in the sixth dimension, this is really where we really are in that unified field. Like there is a sense of being able to move through time and be out of time. There's a sense that we can be somewhere and be nowhere, or be everywhere all at once. And that's what I think that people experience in meditation is, you meditate and you can be in the pyramid, in Giza. You don't have to physically be there. And so this is where now all of this understanding is now linked to the genetics, is now linked to our DNA, is now linked to the amino acids that our body produces, and also the amino acids that our body needs. And so this understanding of like how important food is, nutrition, the cell salts, all of this, it's now taking sort of the scientific terminology, and I've basically connected it all to astrology. And so now we have this understanding that the planets and their movements are imprinting and coding directly into our DNA and unraveling the amino acids. And also they are where the mutations within the DNA happens, and also the epigenetics. And so now I can literally track all of this. And so we can start to see that when Pluto, for example, is transiting a certain sign, that is having an influence on these amino acids and this within our DNA. And so, we may have known this intuitively, but now to have the matrix to say that directly corresponds with this, it's a complete game changer, I think, in terms of how we get to understand this next epoch.
I mean, this is just extraordinary, Rob. And talk about how in this scientific article, they were also referring to this multidimensionality that's within our DNA, and that the geometry that they were showing in their diagrams is the same as the geometry behind your head there.
Yeah, and that's the thing that kind of I don't even know, to be honest, how this landed in my lap. I kind of feel like this was a divine gift that just fell in my lap to see this. And so the thing that caught my attention was the geometry. And so the lost octave is based on Venus and the Venus star, the 8-pointed star, which I saw basically as a hypercube. And that's how it all started. And so when I saw the genetic code being used in the same geometry, that's what caught my attention. And I thought, whoa, like this, does this work on this level as well? And so this paper basically provided the opportunity to say, their study was to say that, look, our DNA goes through multiple dimensions and it's all linked. And then so with that, and my understanding of the amino acids linked with the astrology, I basically converted the scientific study into a more understanding on astrology. And so this is where, as I said to you, Heather, that I was actually being able to read the DNA code of like the A, T, C, and Gs. And I really felt like at one point I was like Neo in the Matrix. I was just seeing scripts of A, T, C, Gs. And I was seeing Mars, Pluto, Neptune. I was seeing the deacons in the and I was reading it like this, and I was like, this is so magical how we can take something like the scientific study and now bring it more into the human and more align it with things like the stars. And so now we see this direct correlation between science, mysticism, and the ancient science of astrology.
And talk about the specific planets that you really saw in that code, because you really saw the correlations with Mars, Venus, Mercury, and Neptune in particular.
Yeah, so I could sort of basically the DNA code is made of A, T, C, and G. And so, that's the basis of how all of those combinations create the DNA code. And so I tried to distill it down to how can I find out what's going to activate what particular DNA strand or what particular code. And so when I went into it, I found that basically Mars and Venus worked as a pair, which is really interesting because that's that divine union right there. And so, the masculine and feminine, you could even say. And then you have really interesting, you have the Neptune with Mercury, and they work as another pair. And of course, all four work together, but it's kind of like they're in two pairs. And so that Neptune Mercury really fascinated me because, you got that high intellect also with the transcendental soul aspect. And so, it's like methodical but artistic at the same time. And then, you've got the genders over here. So this is where we can start to see that when those four planets are in transition, they are affecting directly certain parts of the code. And then the final piece was because there's always this fifth element, right? And so the fifth element was Pluto. And so what I sort of saw was that essentially that as Pluto goes sort of transits through, it's the litmus paper that ignites the code. And so we've seen, when you trace back history, when Pluto's done, its big transit of 248 years, huge changes have happened. And of course, there's a big Pluto exchange at the moment. And so this is where we can start to see where the transmutation or the mutations within the genetics happen, especially when it passes things like start codons and stop codons. These are markers within the DNA of epochs, of ages. And so it really is so deep, but it's kind of simple at the same time. But essentially, it just means that now we can start to see that these planets are really having a direct correlation all the way through our genetic code and on multiple dimensional levels. And so all of this is connected. All of this has been tracked and traced, and I've managed to now move this from the fourth dimension, which is the hypercube, which is in the lost octave symbol, then how it moves into the fifth dimension, and then how it moves into the sixth. And so what's really beautiful about it is that the more multidimensional that we become, the more whole that we will feel. Because as we open all of the doorways, we allow all of those streams of light, of information. And so then we start to really understand our wholeness. And that's what I think is such a beautiful thing, is that the more multidimensional that we understand ourselves to be, the more whole we will feel. And that, I think, is a great catalyst for us to be voyagers into understanding these next dimensions in the human body.
So it is really like we are living in this holographic universe, and this is unlocking the key to our awareness of that. And part of what's profound about this, Rob, is that all of the consciousness of the cosmos is then also within us and literally encoded in our DNA. And I find it profound that in really deciphering the code, you see Venus and Mars as a pair, which is so speaking to that, the importance of that integration of the sacred masculine and sacred feminine. And as you said, Mercury and Neptune, how are we integrating our minds with divine mind? How are we aligning our ways of understanding with cosmic consciousness? And it's all encoded in us, which means we need to honor that spiritual consciousness is in our very embodiment. It's not separate. It's all integrated.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is so beautiful because, they're now knowing that, one drop of DNA can carry like trillion bytes of data, like one drop. And so this is really interesting because obviously in the fourth dimension, we're speaking about time. So the DNA that's within you is also then it's in the past and in the future. And so this is where I feel that how we can track back our past lives and do past life regressions and future life progressions. We can span all these times because this is what's in our body. And so this is so beautiful because we don't need to go anywhere. We don't need to, it's all here. And I think that's the paradox of the stories, that we've often tried to sort of transcend the body, and sort of almost come out of body and all of these things. And then the divine feminine pole shift is saying, no, 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 just as you've reached to the crown, now it's like flip the pole and turn back. And it's so beautiful because now, as I say, we through this, I can now start to track the maternal DNA, which has been a huge breakthrough in the last week and a half. So in the book, I speak about the maternal DNA and how it's linked to the lost octave. And so there's a lot of work that's been done with the nuclear DNA, which is like the two-strand normal DNA. But what most people don't know is there is another DNA, two strands, within that strand. So that's the maternal. And that's the foundation of the power of the cell. So the ATP, so it's the nucleus, the power. So, that's the chi. That's the feminine. So that's the animation force. And so it's really interesting. And so as I've tracked this back, now I've opened this doorway into being able to understand the maternal DNA, which of course we can trace back through into what they call first mitochondrial Eve. And so mitochondrial Eve, they've dated this back, that they can track this back to 200,000 years. This is science saying this. So all of a sudden our history is saying 4,000 years or 5,000 years is our known history. But yet we can trace this DNA back 200,000 years to mitochondrial Eve, which is not necessarily a person, but it's when the first, say, cells would have been formed. And so this is actually dates and goes all the way back to the location of Africa. So isn't that interesting that everybody's mother, for example, because everybody has come from that one source, everybody's mother comes back to that motherland of Africa. And so, as I say, it's not a person called Eve. It's what the science would call mitochondrial Eve. It's the first creation that we can trace back of our human genetics through the mother line. Now, this enables us, through this code, enables us to go back through the fourth dimension, through time, and be able to start to heal and work with and understand all of that ancient coding of Mother Earth, of the feminine line. And so, this is where we get the dragon lines or the song lines of the originals, in Australia. And so, as you say, all of this is encoded right up to date in our body. And so now through this coding of astrology, we've got a doorway now to say, okay, Mars is in this position. This is now a prime time to be working with this particular part of the DNA. And so all of this is this is going to be a huge library that people are going to be able to start to work with and access. It's far greater than me being able to explain it. I'm just able to show the doors and for people to say, walk through them, and we can do this collectively, which is, it's just so amazing.
Well, and you're translating the language of it, and it's just, it's mind-blowing, Rob. But tell us more about how this shapes the evolution of our consciousness as these planetary energies and Pluto is creating these transmutations and these shifts. It feels like what you're saying is the DNA is bridging our experience and our own consciousness with the consciousness of the cosmos, as Jude Currivan and others would talk about. We're surrounded by the love and wisdom and consciousness of the cosmos, but you're literally deciphering how it's also within us, shaping us and our history and our own evolutionary process. But say more about epigenetics and how this is shaping our own our own progression as humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say, I feel like when quantum science starts to use DNA, that's the revolution. So when we use that basis of that understanding of the field and that is linked to the DNA, then that's when it will really be making huge progressions. At the moment, it's sort of like science and maths, and then you've got biology and chemistry. And so, we've separated disciplines when we become that polymath of understanding this with the planetary energies that encoded us in the first place, in this time and space. That's when we're going to make these huge quantum leaps. And so,
well, and also, Rob, you're seeing the integration then of spirituality and science back into a wholeness rather than being separate. So it's not just the disciplines that are separate, it's that gap between our understanding of spirituality and our embodiment and our scientific understanding. They're going to merge.
yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think this is so exciting because, and we can pull this into our terms every day by understanding planetary transits. And so, we get to understand this cosmic weather report, and then we know what to work with and how to work with it on this level, with supporting with foods and our environment and, what we should be doing. And so what I'd like to say about what you said about the epigenetics is that what's interesting is that you could say, like, let's just say the nuclear DNA is let's just say it's like a masculine energy, and then you've got the maternal DNA. And so they both produce amino acids. And so, yeah, and there's a lot of crossover. They basically produce the same amino acids. So they work together. However, there are some very distinct differences. And so one of the differences is that on the summer solstice, I couldn't believe this. So on the summer solstice in Cancer, there's a constellation called the Beehive. And so in ancient esoteric wisdom, the beehive and the honey has always been regarded as the sacred nectar, the amrita and all of these things. It's the divine, it's the gateway of humanity or the gateway of man. It's really been profound. When I looked in the maternal DNA code at the summer solstice point, the normal nuclear DNA actually has a stop codon there. The feminine DNA actually transforms, and it has this ability that it needs serotonin to activate it, right? So this serotonin you get from sunlight and you get from honey, right? You can get it from other things. But this understanding that in order for the divine feminine to activate fully, in order to activate the maternal mother line DNA strands within our body fully at the full output, we need to consume, because you have to get serotonin from food, and you can get it through, through love and things like this, but it's sunlight and food, and it's known as the happy hormone. And so in order to access the feminine DNA, there has to be this level of happiness. If there isn't this happiness in there, then we're not able to access it on that level. And so it makes so much sense that at the peak of the sun, when the light is at its brightest, when the honey is flowing there, when nature is in its full blossom, and we feel that happiness, we can have a direct line through our DNA all the way through into our maternal mother line. And so this is like a marker in the DNA, and it says this. It's like there's an activation there, where instead of it being dormant, it becomes this flooded with serotonin. And that's what also a lot of the indigenous tribes that use things like plant medicine, they use the neurochannels of serotonin to activate aspects within the mind. And of course, that's like the pineal gland, which activates the amrita and stuff. So this goes so deep, and it's now giving us an understanding of it's almost, for me it was almost like it's impossible to access the mother line unless there's that happy hormone,
Mm.
unless the feminine within each one of us feels that happiness of that, the safety, that abundance, that brightness of the light. Once we feel that, we're now connecting to that maternal mother energy. And I just think that's so profound that this is literally written in the genetic code, and it coincides with the summer solstice.
I mean, that piece of information in and of itself is phenomenal, Rob. And it so resonates with Rory Duff's work on how at the summer solstice, solstices and equinoxes, the earth ley lines are activated. So our DNA is getting activated. And not only are you saying that we need to access that energy of joy, of bliss, of happiness to really align with that. But I think the other way of looking at it is when we go deeply within, we're being reminded by that activation, particularly at the summer solstice, that we're always connected to the Great Mother, that energy of the sacred feminine is holding us and guiding us and is within us and has never left us. So that in of itself can activate that sense of security and safety. We are held and we are in our embodiment integrated with this consciousness of the cosmos.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what's really beautiful is that, like you said, it's all connected to the ley lines of the earth, the dragon lines. And of course, that is the maternal DNA. Obviously it's been used to sort of to explain as like the serpents of the Kundalini, but really it's that dragon energy, because they are the dragon's archetype. They are the architects of great change. And so another part of my work is that I've mapped the eras, or the different dragons, and there's actually 9 dragon eras, and they're all connected to different elements. And so, the dragons design the new architecture. And so this is how we can start to understand like how we've evolved and how we're going to evolve. It's really this clarity of map here that's there. And so this understanding of the genetics is that the epigenetics means that we can essentially reprogram ourselves through consciousness. And so I actually call them epita genetics, because epita it basically means above that, or it means more than. So it means that we can potentize what we have within ourselves. We can transcend, or we can move into a different dimension of understanding within our own genetics. And so it's so beautiful. We know that there's a direct correlation between how we think and how we feel, and if they align, then that's when we start to perceive synchronicities and miraculous events. I can take all of that terminology now and see that in the genetic code, that we have to have this sense of happiness, of joy within us, if we want to experience that mother line, that divine feminine aspect on this multidimensional level. We can span the history and into the future. And I think tapping into this, we can really start to see how best we can serve Mother Earth, how best we can serve humanity as a whole. And I just think there's so many opportunities here to make some great shifts through this.
One of the things that's extraordinary in what you're saying, I don't know if you know Hawkins' scale of consciousness, but he looks at these different levels of consciousness, and joy is one of the higher levels. And what you're saying is then it opens us up to this greater awareness and these energies then that are supporting us in our evolutionary journey. And if I'm hearing you correctly, Rob, I think what you're saying is that as all this information and awareness is encoded in our DNA, it doesn't mean that our journey is predictive or deterministic. It's guiding us to connect our consciousness with the consciousness of the cosmos, to open to our wholeness, so that we then are on our evolutionary path individually and collectively from a place of clarity and consciousness. And that when we do get out of joy or caught in fear or reactivity or anger, then we're dropping out of that pathway to higher consciousness that supports us in accessing that wisdom that's encoded in our DNA to connect us to this universal consciousness that is trying to guide us in this journey of growth in, I would say, growth in love and wisdom.
Yeah, that's so beautifully put. And so how it works, we can say on a geometry level, because it's quite easy to see it on a geometry level how these things work. So, for example, in the fourth dimension, there are four groups of the DNA. You can group it into the DNA, the amino acids. And then what happens in the fifth dimension is that they work in these two pairs and they join. So instead of four, it becomes two. And then in the sixth dimension, the two join together. So now it becomes one, and it hasn't sacrificed any of the parts. They've just joined and become bigger, more unified. So that the higher up the dimensions we understand ourselves and this reality, really there isn't any separation there. And so this now is been proven in the science, in the genetic code, and now in the geometry and the maths. And so this is just, it's no longer sort of a thought like that's what feels right. This is now becoming the truth of what this is all about. And so, as I say, when you ask about, or when people ask about how to access, other dimensions, well, first of all, we're already doing it. We just don't know. We haven't had that narrative, as I say, walking from here to there, or that space and time. Once you realize that space and time, everything we do is on a space-time agenda. And so once you realize that is really operating in the fourth and fifth dimension, then you've got that sort of awareness of moving through space and time. That's where the sixth is. So it's a kind of like that observer role where in meditation of, I understand my responses and my reactions. I'm aware of these things. I'm aware of moving from here to there. So that's really where the sixth is. It's like that observer where everything's all intertwined. And that's why I say that as soon as quantum physics starts to merge with DNA, it's our whole understanding of this unified field is just going to be so beautiful. And this sense of separation is going to vanish very quickly. And it's kind of like that tuning fork, when you hit a tuning fork and the other tuning fork's the same frequency, it starts to resonate because everything's all connected. And so this, of course, is another part of this journey for me, is to link all of this now to music and frequencies, which I've done through the Lost Octave with the astrology already, but now to try and do this within the actual genetic code itself. And so these are all new opportunities for us to explore and, places for us to heal and to look into and to listen to connect with, on a real human senses way.
So when we get to that sixth dimension, Rob, and we're in that unified field, then we're no longer bound by time and space. And so, and as you're describing it, we're in that observer self. So we're in that state of consciousness that we can play in time and space, but we're not bound by them. And then we really understand the power of our consciousness.
Yeah, I would say exactly. It's difficult to have this pole shift understanding of this is already the truth of it. That you are already in that sort of soul seat of the observer role, believing ourselves to be bound by time. And so this takes a bit of a getting used to. But often in meditation, that's when you start to get this idea, or when you're dancing, or you're in that sort of, aligned state of synchronicity. Then that's when you start to realize everything's almost like moving around you and you're just being a vibration. And so that is that field. So yeah, this is where, as I say, this understanding of being able to access our past lives, past memories, understand what happened in the past, and also be able to access the future. And, you know, when we dream, you know, when we dream of our goals, what we want to be when we grow up, or what we want to do when we're, you know, that we're already in the future. We're already experiencing the future. And of course, that's part of this whole how do we manifest reality that's been popularized is, you know, see yourself already in that space, already receiving it or smelling it. So we're already now doing this. We just haven't yet had this understanding or the language to say, okay, you're now operating from that fifth and sixth dimensional framework just by doing that. And so accessing, you know, your favorite memory of your family, or, you know, an event you went to, you're already accessing that fourth dimension purely through your own memory. And so this is going to be a new language that we're going to be able to integrate. And so this idea of being stuck in the 3D construct, it's going to disappear very, very quickly. And that we needed that third dimensional construct of an object, because then we get to understand the object moving through space and time. And then we realize that we are the consciousness of that object, and also the one aware of that object. And so this is where, yeah, I just feel that this is going to completely change how we start to perceive our lives and each other, because no matter what I do, if I try to work independently, it's going to affect everything else. It's just, it is there. Same with the DNA. If we access that happy hormone, that has a cascade effect throughout the genetic genome, you know, and then that goes all the way through the fractal lines, all the way back to first Eve. So, you know, so by me being happy and accessing that serotonin space within my own body, like I am making a difference in that genetic line in the future and the past. And so really the power is with us right now in this moment. And I know it's been said many times before, but with this understanding of the astrology linking this, it's showing how important that daily astrology understanding is, and understanding the story of the stars and how that affects us, and what we've been imprinted with, and what we're designed to do in this lifetime, and the gifts that we have. Like, that is so important to every day know this and to work with this, because it really is making a difference, even if we can't perceive it in our day-to-day reality.
What's so powerful in what you're saying is you're so describing what it means to be moving into the Aquarian age, where we remember that everything is energy and everything is interconnected. And it so fits, Rob, with my own understanding of astrology, that it is not predictive or deterministic, that it is the language of the planets and stars. It is the language of the cosmic consciousness guiding us in our own journey of consciousness. And the key is to read the language, to be aligning ourselves and our soul selves with that consciousness of the cosmos. And you're speaking to how then it's actually embedded in us. And it reminds me of Keone Hanalei talking about the Akashic records are all within us. And he describes it as connected to the cerebral spinal fluid, but you're basically saying the Akashic records are literally encoded in our DNA.
Yeah.
And it feels like you're saying the key is to then realize all of that consciousness is within us. And when we come to center, you know, I see the chart as a medicine wheel. When we come to the center, then we can access all those energies, but we realize everything is in us in the present moment.
Yeah. And that's
the past, the present, the outer, the inner, it's all there in that present moment. Yeah,
and that's so beautiful to say, because for those that don't know, in a hypercube understanding, is that the cube that's inside the cube. So they say the sarcophagus. In the fourth dimension of understanding is that the sarcophagus becomes the room, and the room becomes the sarcophagus, and they interchange over and over again. So what is inside becomes outside, what is outside becomes inside. And it's just this ever moving toroidal flow. And that's the motion of the fourth dimension. And so that's why you have the precession and procession kind of almost canceling each other out, happening at the same time. And so the only time that is real is where you are in the center point of that torus. And so that center point, you could say in astrology, with the introduction of the 13th zodiac, the Orpheochus, and the 13th would be in the center, for example. And so in the Lost Octave, I revealed that Orpheochus actually, when you take the S from the end of Orpheochus and put it at the beginning, you end up with Sophiuku, so Sophia, the,
Wisdom.
the divine feminine wisdom. So, and she's the dragon bearer, right? She's the mother of dragons. And of course, all of this about the dragon lines, the DNA, the maternal DNA. And so this is why I feel that this has come at this time, because as we've started to evolve in our understanding of astrology and the signs and getting used to Orpheochus and what this is about, it's not just about sort of the kundalini of the body, it's about us connecting to the kundalini of the planet, which is actually moved, and it's moved over towards Mexico, South America. That's where the new central kundalini hub is of the planet. It used to be in the Himalayas. And so...
Yeah, Peru area, yeah.
Yeah, the Andes. And I feel like the prophecy that I put out was that there's going to be a mountain in the Andes that will become the new Mount Meru for the 6th root race, so the brand new root race that's, or consciousness that's coming in. And so all of this work with the pyramids in Mexico, all the Lake Titicaca, Peru, and also you've got the Polynesian islands, and you've got like Hawaii, you've got Western Australia, New Zealand, all of that South Pacific line there. That's the hub. And it doesn't just mean that only people that are there, connect to this consciousness. It's just like that's the central place, and there will be a lot of new children being born there that will come in with completely different set of genetics, different set of understandings. They'll come in at a different level, and that's where that 6th root race of the Aquarian age is now being born there. So all of this is connected, through this understanding of the dragon lines, the feminine, the sine wave, the sound, the movement. And so, this is where the beauty is to complement that masculinity of the mountain, of Shiva sitting there in meditation and non-moving. Well, now we've got the complement of saying, yes, you can be the non-moving, but you're also this moving thread. You are this dream weaver of that sacred sort of dream catcher that's being woven by the feminine, that 13th sign.
Rob, I have to say, talking to you is like reading your book, that like each page of your book, I have to pause and integrate it. It's like each chapter could be a whole book in and of itself. I mean, the amount of what you're sharing here and the layers of wisdom in it is incredible. And I just want to circle back a minute to, well, two things. I mean, my mind is going in like 15 directions, but one of the things that you're saying, and it's interesting, a cutting edge for me in my exploration in astrology, is we need to weave in more fully the ancient wisdom and understanding of the sky from the southern hemisphere. Our astrology has been so dominated by the northern hemisphere. And I'm in interaction with some people now, and we're working on that. I think that's part of coming into our wholeness as humanity and our wholeness of understanding the star lore and the sky. But the other piece that's fascinating in what you're saying is I've just recently put out a talk on that dynamic of Orion opposite Ophiuchus in the sky. And I know Robert Edward Grant has done so much exploration of Orion. And we both really see Orion, that constellation, as symbolic of our collective evolutionary journey as humanity. And I think it's so profound that both where Orion is in its own journey in the sky in relation to the precessional cycle, but that it's opposite Ophiuchus, who is the serpent bearer, showing the integration of the sacred masculine and sacred feminine. And you're connecting it with Sophia wisdom is phenomenal. It's like this is symbolic of how you come into wholeness, how you
Yeah.
come into that journey of openness to a higher consciousness and the awareness of the unified field, and then integrate it within you. It's
You're,
it's all in the sky, it's written in the sky, and it's literally written in our bodies.
yeah, and that's why I say the subtitle to the book is Our Story in the Stars. Because it's so interesting how, you can basically predict, and astrology has always been so great at predicting events and things like that because they're just mirrors, and that's why I say our encoding is this mirror. The stars are us, already in way into the future. So they're our ascended selves. And so, as you say, this beautiful balance of Orpheochus, and in the book, I qualified Orpheochus and Orion as zodiac signs through the astronomy. And so Orion would be the 14th zodiac sign. And so what's really interesting is they both have belts. So you have the serpentine belt of
Yeah.
Sophia and Orion's belt. So you've got the masculine and feminine belt. Well, of course, that's where the genders are.
Wow.
Right. And so that's also where you've got the past and the future, two ends of the belt. So you could liken them to the north and south nodes. And so what's really interesting is, speaking about mathematical things, when you look at the Vitruvian Man and you have the square and the circle, so the square, is normally associated to the masculine and the circle is the feminine. And so squaring the circle is this mathematical problem that is sort of solved. And so there's been lots of work done on that, and the Vitruvian Man is one of the main displays of this. Mm-hmm. Well, when you look at the center of the square, it actually aligns to the root chakra, right? Mm. When you look at the center of the circle, it aligns to the sacral. So now you've got the masculine square connected to the root, and the feminine is connected to the navel or the sacral chakra. And so right at the belt point, you've got the feminine and masculine belts right there. And the difference is one's the feminine, one's the masculine. And so this story in the stars is in our mathematics, is in our divine proportion of the Vitruvian Man, and it's in the chakra system. So now we get this understanding of when we're operating from that masculine square looking, it's that root base. Mm-hmm. And then when we're moving into the feminine, we're moving into that sacral energy. And then together they're the caduceus staff. And so the serpentine belt, instead of going laterally, combines and goes vertically. And that's the Kundalini. And so that star story is in the 13th and 14th sign, which is in that next octave of astrology.
It's so extraordinary how it's all written in the sky, written in our DNA. And we have just, I think, in this period of the Kali Yuga, disconnected from that awareness, but it's all coming back now. It's coming more fully into our awareness. And you're an incredible pioneer, helping us begin to see the story and the wisdom that's in us and all around us. And you were going to talk a little bit more about this larger processional cycle we've been in and Atlantis. Do you want to talk some about that?
Yeah. I'll bring up the display for.
Here, let me give you a co-host.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to speak about this because I think this is a really vital aspect to understanding, our times and the Yuga cycles. Okay. Okay. So, there's lots of different philosophies on this, and I know you've gone into this as well, Heather. And so this is based off of Sri Yukteswar's work. There's different understandings of how long these different yugas are. But what I liked about Sri Yukteswar's work is that it kind of brought it a bit more down into this understanding, into our dimension of times, because like a Kali Yuga can be like 432 million years in one of the philosophies. It's kind of almost non-tangible, for us to even try and connect to understand that. And so what he did was he actually aligned it and said, no, they're actually in thousands of year cycles. And so you can actually see here that in 2024, this is our position here. And, we've got about, officially, if we were to use the long cycle, we've got about 130 years left in the Piscean age. If we use the short cycle, we're already in the Aquarian age. So again, it depends on which way you work. But what's really interesting is that we, in this way Sri Yukteswar did it, we've actually moved from the Iron Age or the Kali Yuga, and we've entered into the beginning of the Bronze Age, the Dwapara Yuga. And, it's interesting because I feel like at the moment, humanity's in that split between I really feel we're in that Bronze Age of progressing and we're advancing at such a rate, but yet there's this sort of like Kali Yuga cloud.
That's a great way to put it, Rob.
It's still like just not letting the sun come in somehow. And so, yeah, I think that it's interesting. It's kind of like a dual timeline where we're in these dual aspects at this time. So with this, we can trace and have a look at what signs were where. And when I went back in history, you can see that, at the beginning of the Piscean age, when the sort of the story of Jesus is there, that was at the lowest point of the Kali Yuga, which kind of makes sense, right? That there's somebody, in that story, that somebody's there to profess love and oneness and ends up being, killed for it. I mean, that's the kind of level of consciousness that we were at that time. And so we have progressed quite a bit, I think, since then. Although, again, we see reflections of this, around the world still, which is absolutely mind blowing that we're, nearly 2000 years, further on, and this is still happening. So that's why I say this cloud of Kali Yuga is still around. And so when we go backwards in the procession, we can see that the time of Aries, this would have been the time of, how the Hebrews, they moved from Egypt, and they went in search of the promised land of the milk and honey. And so that was the time of Moses there. And then prior to that, in the previous Bronze Age, we move into Taurus, which is where we have what we know now as ancient Egypt and the Hathor temples and the Dendera stone and things like this. So it's really interesting because we think of ancient Egypt as we know it, and then there's an even more ancient Egypt, which is more akin to the Atlantean times. Yes. So this age of Taurus was that Bronze Age. And then the Silver Age was really the story of where humanity started again. So Adam and Eve. And that's why it's interesting that, again, these stories align with the stars. And so this is really where the Silver Age was, where we had to rebuild humanity. Because right here in Cancer, and today is literally the perfect day for this podcast, because this is when I predicted would have been the fall of Atlantis. So right here in Cancer, we have a constellation called Argo Navis. It's one of the decans, the third decan. And so Leo was our golden age of Atlantis. That was where the Sphinx was. That was the kind of the last part of the golden age of Atlantis. And then when we had the flood, the fall, that's where we have Noah's Ark, Argo Navis. It's the ship, where all the animals go 2 by 2. The DNA strands are woven in. And so this right here, today's date, is the decan of Argo Navis. And so that's why I say it's a perfect time to be speaking about this. And so we can kind of predict now that this, in the long cycle, So at the this part here would be 8,640 BC, but of course we've got 2024 to add. So it would actually be approximately around between 10 and 11,000 BC. So that gives us an idea. And then the Leo is where we predict roughly where the pyramids were built, or the Sphinx would be about 13,000 years ago. And so it's so great that all of the stories that we've heard up to this point and through our history are all linked to astrology. And that's what makes it really easy for us to start to date these events and the cataclysms that happened. You know, like when Moses moved out of Egypt, it was all of the plagues, you know, and so the fall of Atlantis was the great flood. And so, you know, all of this is here. And I just think this gives us an idea of what to expect, you know, in different ages. And so when we look at the Bronze Age here, I mean, in Taurus, of course, it was all about opulence. You know, it was so much opulence and wisdom and all the decoration and all the beauty, you know, of that Taurian energy in the Bronze Age. And so it becomes very much about the details and the sacred again. And you can see that we are now starting to bring back that Egyptian wisdom more than ever now into this Aquarian age, because it's opposite Leo, where that golden age was. And so we're getting that influence from the past, and why all these discoveries in the pyramids that we've seen with the petroglyphs, and we've seen the alignments to the stars, and why Orion is coming back so prevalently, you know, it's because that's what makes me feel like we really are in this Bronze Age, because this wisdom is now coming back from these ancient lineages. So a doorway has opened for us to be able to access this. So yeah, this fall of Atlantis, I think that's really interesting for us to know, because, you know, again, we do this every year. We go through these star stories every year. And so I even put a post out yesterday saying, like, this week is something big's going to happen this week, because, you know, this was the fall of Atlantis. This is the great flood. So, you know, a huge structure or something that's in power, some organization, something is going to happen where it's going to be like a cataclysm. And then lo and behold, I hear on the news, yesterday's news, you know, in America. So it's, you know, you can start to see that these patterns repeat themselves, not in the same ways, but this what gives us an idea of how to work with this.
Well, and again, you're saying it's like that energy of the past and energy of the future are all resonating, and they're getting activated at these critical points. So here we are midway through Sun and Cancer. It's getting activated in terms of these energies from the age of Cancer. And how interesting that it's all timed now, today, when we're also in the exact conjunction of Uranus Mars. So it's like all of these energies are speaking to some really clear, significant shift.
Yeah.
And it's also fascinating, Rob, what you're saying about, and I think this is part of what's so important in your work. You're reweaving the polarities to help us come into this wholeness, that when we're moving into the age of Aquarius, we're resonating with the age of Leo. So it's bringing us back into this larger consciousness, and again, the unified field.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, for example, as you say about the reweaving of opposites, so right here at the beginning of Pisces and where Aries is, well, on that line here, you've got the Libra Virgo line, so the equinox line. Well, the decan that's right here in Libra is the crucifixion. So isn't that interesting that you could basically predict that there would have been some kind of a crucifixion, maybe not of a person, but of some, you know, that feel. You can predict that that was going to happen here, because it's written in the stars and it's opposite. So, you know, they work in that dual understanding. And so that's why I say, when we're moving into this age of Aquarius, we really at this point need to go into this understanding of, we don't want this cataclysm happening again. And And that's the internal pole shift that is in the book that I speak of, is that when we make this move, whether it's into the fourth, fifth, and sixth dimensional understandings, or it's a divine feminine view, when we can do it internally, it will reflect externally. And if we don't learn from, where we've been, then it's pretty much predictable that it's going to be no surprise that something like that is going to happen again. And so we don't have to choose that. We could be the builders of the ark. Instead of being flooded and wiped out, we can be the builders of the ark. We can save the animals. We can save that which is most important. And we can allow the earth to cleanse itself. And yet then we can restart anew. A completely different story to we're going to be wiped out by, a cataclysmic event. And so this is how we can co-create with the star stories, with, the earth. And
Rob, I just want to underscore that what you're saying is so profound, so important. And this is some of the power of your book and what you're speaking to, that pole shift that's coming can happen within us. So it doesn't happen in a cataclysmic way outside of us. And as I know from my research of the precessional cycle, every 12, 13,000 years, we have this major shift that can manifest as a cataclysmic event, as it did 12, 13,000 years ago. But it's meant to be a cataclysmic shift, transformation within us. So it's our choice. And part of what you're saying that I think is so important is if we work this inner process of evolution of consciousness, then it will manifest in this outer shift that is about our moving into this new world of higher consciousness. But if we resist that, or if we get caught in our unconscious memory of the trauma of the past and don't bring that into awareness, then our tendency is to just reenact it. So what you're saying is so important, Rob.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. And that's why I say that the fourth dimension of understanding is so important. Because when we understand that what is inside becomes outside and what's outside becomes inside, then there's this portal opening that you can affect the outside environment, and the outside obviously affects us. And we've kind of been understanding that the outside affects us. But now it's the internal blossoming of saying, well, I'm choosing this state. I'm choosing how I'm choosing how to be in my environment. And then it's like that happiness hormone. When you're happy, all of a sudden, everything else seems easy. Like in your life, like when you had a really good bit of news, everything seems to just fall into place. And you have these miraculous days where, wow, today everything just was so great. Everyone was so nice to me today. No, you were the one that made that happen. And so the more that we can self-discover this, it's going to be great. I mean, imagine the collective consciousness all doing this. It would really transform overnight. And the one thing I'll say about the Argo Navis, which is it's such a great story, and today is actually one of the main important markers of the animal kingdom. Because, in the stars, why the animals go in 2 by 2 to the ark? Of course, it's the DNA, but in the stars, there's like the 2 bears. There's 2 birds, there's 2 dogs. It's like there's 2 of everything in the stars, of these animals. And so when we see that, we're like, oh, I see. So it's all about this great procession of the equinox moving into this ark. And the ark is like a ship, a vehicle, or a light body. And so it's about moving our consciousness on the ship, on our Merkaba, a light vehicle, moving into another paradigm. And of course, from Atlantis to the Silver Age, it was a sort of a descension in consciousness. Whereas now it's this, we can now move up into the next octave. And just to go back to your point about the Southern Hemisphere, I too love the Southern Hemisphere. And because of the pole shift, it's going to become even more important.
Yes.
And Argo Navis is right there. So you've got it's huge. And it's split into 3 constellations now in the star law. But it's this one constellation, and it's just huge. I think it takes up nearly two signs, I think, nearly like 60 degrees. It's just massive. And so that goes to show that, this ability for us to store all of the records, like you said, the Akashic records, then the DNA, and move into a new paradigm is right there. And in the arc story, there is only one window. Do you know where that window is, Heather?
I have no idea.
You'll laugh at this one. There was only one window in the ark. It was in the ceiling
Oh my goodness. Of course.
to see the stars. So it knows where to go, how to navigate it. And so that in
Or
itself is one of the most profound, simple teachings, is that when we know the stars, then we are going to move on our ship, move as a consciousness in perfectly the right way. It's all going to be guided in the right way when we navigate the stars. And that was written one of our oldest stories. And so there you are. How beautiful is that? That the only window that you need is above you. Perhaps, or perhaps it's these days. Perhaps it's more the Aquarian age. It's more the only window you need is, in the heart inside you. Perhaps that's our next narrative.
Oh, Rob, thank you so much. I mean, this is a great place to stop, and we will continue this conversation. There's so much wisdom in what you have to share, but I just want to highlight what you just said. I think that window is in our hearts, but when we open that window of our hearts, then we see and remember the wisdom of the stars. And it is all around us and it is within us. And to me, that's what opens us to joy. That's what activates that happiness within us, is to realize we are a part of this oneness of all that is. We are held, we are guided, we are loved, we are being supported in this journey of consciousness.
Yeah.
And we can rest in that.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said, and thank you so much for that, for this, Heather. And it's so great to speak to you. And yeah, just to say, in order to access that maternal mother line, to taste the honey, to move into that happiness hormone, and that's our gateway. And how beautiful it is, how simple it is that when we feel happiness, when we can express ourselves with that joy, then we can go all the way back through time to first Eve and all the way through into the future evolution of Gaia.
Oh, thank you so much, Rob. And again, I want to encourage people to get the Lost Octave, and I will put that reference below. But thank you for this profound work that you're doing.
Beautiful. Great to be here, Heather.
And thank you to this community for being a part of this movement into this journey of higher consciousness. Blessings and love to all of you.